here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned. Immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we'd love a special guest. This week it's going to be the world of theatre for various reasons, which I'll explain in a bit. But I spoke to John Abulafia about his life in the creative arts and theatre, and also about Incubus, which was a theatre company that originated or started in the late 60s and then went through to various other decades. But also, because I'm from East Anglia, it was the theatre company that came to one of the, or several of the East Anglian fairs and festivals, Barsham, possibly Albion. But anyway, I thought it would be fascinating to hear John's life, so I got an interview with him. So this is it. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we begin at the start of John's interest in life in theatre and creativity. Anyway, John will explain much more in this fascinating interview. John, it's over to you.
Yes, I think it was. I think it's to do with the period when it happened. Because I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, because I'm also quite involved, and my wife is as well, in the teaching of theatre. I mean, I've done a lot of teaching. And I think, and, you know, I've got kids, you know, now in their 30s. And I think that actually what happened in that period, when we're talking about 1968, 69, into the 70s, it was so much easier to actually start a theatre company, to actually think, oh, what I want to do is I want to start a theatre company. So we did, you know, and you could live very cheaply. You didn't necessarily have to spend a lot of time earning money. You could devote the time to it. And now, I think it would be really impossible for a lot of kids to start that, to go to drama school, or in my case, university, or in Paddy's case, art college, and to decide, I have an idea of what I want theatre to be, or what I want music theatre to be in my case as well. And I will found a company and start it from those first principles. And I will learn as I go along. That, I think, would be really almost impossible today.
Yes.
On the other hand, what you have now is you have courses. I think you have courses in experimental theatre. You have courses in theatre that would have previously been very much on the fringe. So, you know, that's good, but I mean, it also does bring it introduces another element of sort of conservatism to it, because, you know, it's what's really important is deciding, it's a thing Sondheim said, you know, he said, content dictates form. So what you want to do is going to determine how you do it. And, you know, we found that out really, honestly, David, by trial and error. Yes. Most of the time we didn't have the faintest idea what we were doing, but we just knew we wanted to try it. And it was trial and error, because when we did our first show, which was based on Kafka's Metamorphosis, I mean, I wrote the adaptation, and we did it once, I remember in the summer of 68, and it sort of worked about 70%, and then we took it back, and we basically were ruthless with it, and Paddy was ruthless with what I'd written, probably quite rightly, and in the end we had something really good, because we actually just used our instinct on this worked, this didn't work, we tried it out.
Yes.
And I think that's really hard for young people today, because there's much less room for that kind of experimentation.
Yes, it's interesting, actually, because I mean, a lot of my interviews, I suppose, you know, the large majority are done with bands and of a certain period, going way back. And a lot of it is the apprenticeship years of playing live for a few years at least.
Yes,
very
I can see that.
And then, you know, it's almost like getting hundreds of gigs under your belt. Some good, some disastrous, some a complete waste of time. You get those little moments that just kind of go, that was good. But then you're prepared, you know, a little bit more prepared for what comes. Also, you can decide then if this is going to be something you want to keep with, or you're thinking, you know, when you're unloading your gear at 3 o'clock in the morning, going upstairs, you know, do that kind of business. Are you going to really want to keep doing this in a couple of years' time, and that kind of, yeah, it's like, you know what, I'm out of the band, and then someone else comes in and they go, yeah, I'd love to drive a transit van around the country and get in at 3-4 in the morning and unpack all the stuff and keep it together. You know, it's a good apprenticeship though, and it was a drummer I was talking to last night who started music in the, I suppose, late 60s, 70s. And that was all he wanted to do. But he was talking about Adele, you know, saying, well, she just went from something to like almost like huge sales, you know, and then Las Vegas, and then pulled the night before. And it was almost like, we would never do that. You know, he was saying, you know, that is just something that old rockers do not do. You just wouldn't pull a gig. Yeah. You know, you would take whatever you had to do to get through that experience, but you had that. Whereas, you know, he wasn't sure, but that was his theory.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it, I mean, if you're asking about Incubus, one of the things that that obviously what happened was that nobody was paid. I mean, I think you have to come down to this. I mean, people have to earn a living, you know, they have to live somewhere. And nobody was paid. And I think what I did is I left after about 3-4 years because I wanted to do the same thing, but for money, you know. Mm-hmm. But also there was something else that, you know, as long as I think it's something people don't talk about so much, which is what's the economic relationship within those companies. So when it starts out, and I don't know if it's the same for bands at all, because I think the money issue is a bit different, but there does come a point when people start to feel exploited. You know, they do begin to feel exploited, that they, you know, people have a sense of ownership of over what they've created. And that's right. I think it's quite right that people do that. So, but when it's created by a group, the group really owns it. But the people within it, I think, need to know that what's going on is fair, you know? And there came a point when I felt with Incubus where I felt I can't ask these people to give up their time for no money. And because they're being exploited, you know, it's straightforward exploiting. I mean, you know, one of them was sort of wanting to do teacher training. Fair enough, that's okay. I mean, that's really what they wanted to do, to earn a living, and there were good teachers as well, I'm sure. So I think there is that side of it, which is often not spoken about. You know, that it's wonderful having all these ideas and ideals, but in the end, you know, the world is a real place, and you have to earn a living. Yes. Which is what I decided. You know, what came up was an Arts Council opportunity. I mean, I applied for an assistant directorship through the Arts Council scheme, and it came down to 3 people. You know, there were 3 of us, and there were 2 jobs. And they obviously wanted to, you know, they thought we 3 were the ones, and I can't remember who the other 2 were, but I think they went on to have good careers. And the one that came up was, you know, the other thing came up was, they said, well, there is this theatre company that's starting up. They want to start this theatre company up in Burnley, of all places, Burnley, right? Basically, instead of being an assistant director, your job would be to be artistic director of this company, and get it going from basically nothing, and you have a budget and all the rest of it. And I said yes. You know, and I'm never regret that. But we started a company called Theatre Mobile, and I'll never ever regret that, because I think that if I learned about, with Paddy and with Incubus, I learned about, you know, what was possible, what you could do, and how far you could go, and creating a style out of our imagination. That I learned an awful lot about that. But with Theatre Mobile, I learned about audiences, and they're the people who pay. They're the ones that, you know, when I teach now, well, I don't teach so much now. When I taught acting, for example, at RADA and Guildhall, the first thing I'd ask people was whether they were actors or singers, is who are the most important people in the theatre, and they would sort of flatter me, and they'd say, well, the director, and some more sort of money-minded ones would say the star, and some sensible people would say the stage manager, and and I said, no, you're all wrong. It's the audience. They're the most important people in the theatre, because they're the ones. Without them, you wouldn't be there.
Yes.
You see, and I think learning about audiences was really, really crucial. But what would work with an audience, and understanding that, I had no training at all. I just learned on the job, and that's really interesting, situation to be in, which I think would be harder today.
Yes, absolutely. I think you have to have those days of sort of, I don't know. I think it was Geoffrey Bernard. I think this is a bit of a throwaway comment, what it would be. It was Geoffrey Bernard. He wanted to go into acting once, because he said when he used to go and watch things, he said it looked like people just messing about on stage. I think that's a sweeping statement. But, those...
It's a very great skill, Very great skill.
But the thing is, with those kind of very early days when you're a student and you're going to these little events like in East Anglia, it gives you the chance to almost fake it till you make it, doesn't it? And I think that's the moment where you think, oh, did I like it enough to want to do it? Or actually, was that something I think that's something I don't want to do? So that's kind of good for your own progress, because in a way, it's better to know what you don't want to do quite quickly rather than having the dream. Which is talking of having the dream. I mean, what was just to go back to the very early days, what were you like as a teenager growing up? Say when you were doing your A-levels, was theatre and performing something that you wanted to do?
No, I was mainly interested in girls, I think. Girls and music.
It was the 60s, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, yes, but also, I mean, to be honest, I had a very, very sort of repressed childhood. I think, repressed is the wrong word. I think that what was so interesting, and it sort of comes out now a lot in the things I've been writing and lots of what I've written, it's actually that because I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. Not maybe personally, none of my family were in a concentration camp. But one of the things you learn pretty quickly is that those who went through the war and went through all of that were, to a certain extent, emotionally, they were survivors. So my mother was much older, really. She came from Poland in 1905, and they fled here from the pogroms. And she was frightened for almost all her life. Her life was bound in by fear. And you could almost feel it and touch it. So she really wanted to sort of kind of stay at home. My father, he was another kind of Jew. My father was Sephardic Jewish, because my mother was Ashkenazi Jewish, which is Eastern European. My father was Sephardic Jewish, which is Spanish, Portuguese. They were, when I go with, because my wife is half Spanish, so we go to Andalusia, for example. And, there's a street in Seville, there's a street named after one of my ancestors in the 12th century. I mean, they were rabbis and poets and mystics and musicians and politicians. There's one who's a politician who's like Chancellor of the Exchequer to Pedro the Cruel. And that's very different. There was something, they regarded themselves as a kind of aristocracy. So it was a really kind of weird schizophrenic childhood. But I think from my mother, I got a great love of music and my fascination with Eastern Europe. And that's why, for example, my first play was Kafka's Metamorphosis.
Yes.
Czech, Eastern European. And from my father, I got this idea. I mean, being descended from rabbis and mystics, musicians. I mean, I got a sense of writing and ideas and, because the philosophical side of it, I was much more interested in that as well. So there's the two together. So I think I got a lot from both, as it were, traditions, and then all sort of played out really. And when I was a teenager, I think, I became very, very interested in music. I mean, classical music, because it felt to me like I mean, Bernstein said it rightly. I think Bernstein said that classical music, its greatness comes from the fact that it most nearly reflects the way human beings experience emotion, which is that you're not happy, but you're happy, but a bit fearful it might be taken away, or a bit sad that it didn't happen before, or happy that, or regretful and happy. So emotions are never simple and clear. And that music like Schubert and Mahler and Shostakovich and Dvorak all reflect that sort of ambiguity of emotion. And I found that I found that very rewarding.
Yes.
That was something that really, I mean, all my life, music has been hence all the CDs behind me.
Yes.
And that's why I love directing opera, because I think it's got, and creating music theatre. And I mean, I don't just mean, opera. I mean, things like the tango opera that I created and directed, and I want to write one as well. That's, with a composer, not the music. Because I think there's something, what music brings to theatre is an element of ritual, which I think I've always been interested in. But it's not naturalistic theatre, ritual in theatre. And opera is basically ritual, because nobody, it's not naturalistic, nobody sings in that way. Everything's heightened, that's what made me interested, really.
Yes.
So I've rambled.
No, that's fine. I mean, I was thinking then, so did you have a very protective childhood at this stage? I mean, leaving home, going to university?
Claustrophobically so. So when I went to university, it was like, I could actually do what I wanted. And of course, I was, to be quite honest, I was both excited and completely fucking terrified. Completely terrified. I had no idea how to be, or how to really how to be with people. It was very difficult because I had parents who were really frightened most of their lives.
Yes.
My mother was terrified, I mean, quite reasonably, because most of her extended family died in the Holocaust, the ones who didn't leave Poland in just before the First World War. They stayed, and nobody knows what happened to them. I have an uncle on my father's side who was in the French Resistance and was executed by the Nazis. So yeah, I can understand exactly why they were frightened, But it seemed to me it wasn't that great for me because it wasn't, in a way, I was never really educated in life. I had to do it for myself.
Yes. Yes.
I did it for myself, basically. And creating theatre was one of the ways I think I kind of taught myself. It was really a finding out about what I really felt and what I wanted to do.
And had you sort of picked up this kind of wave of kind of new theatre and experimental theatre in the 60s? I know, because I've done quite a few interviews with people in San Francisco with the Coquettes and Bayette and Pam Tent and another guy who was all part of that kind of, Hibiscus, that's the main man, isn't it? Had they come onto your radar, or did they ever come onto your radar?
They did, but after I started working in theatre, only when I started working, and after I left university and was, for example, invited to direct at the Royal Court, and on the strength of Metamorphosis, and we won the NMS Drama Festival with that. On the strength of that, that did very well. That went to the Oxford Playhouse, and we got lots of attention and television. We did, some of our stuff ended up on television, which was good. BBC, and then I began to understand what was going on with a lot of the experimental theatres, and also because we were when Incubus rehearsed, we rehearsed at Oval House. Right. Oval House, a lot of the other companies were rehearsing there, so I went to see their shows.
Yes. Did you see Pork?
No, I didn't. No.
I just wondered if that had come onto your radar, the great pork. So look, Incubus. So you and Paddy met. Was this at Sussex University?
Sussex. He was at Brighton Art College and I was at Sussex, yes.
And how did you meet?
I can't remember. I really can't remember. No, I have no idea I cannot remember how we met, but met we did.
Yes.
And I tell you what, with Metamorphosis, it was interesting. I'll tell you what it was. I can't remember exactly how we met, but we did meet. But when I had one of my friends from school was at Cambridge, and when I explained to him that I wanted to do a stage version of Metamorphosis, he basically said, "That's impossible. You can't do that." And my attitude was, well, I need no further encouragement then.
Yes.
And then when I met Paddy and said, I want to do Metamorphosis, and I want to have someone turning into an insect, he said, I'll never speak to you again if you don't cast me in that role. So that was it. That was the difference.
Yes.
You know? And Paddy and I we complemented each other very well. And I think Incubus worked because it was really a meeting of two approaches to theatre. There was the university approach and there was the art college approach. And the university approach, mine was a lot about, from that point, my starting point at least, I didn't end up that way, but my starting point was about, this is the story, these are the ideas, this is what we're trying to do. And Paddy was much more concerned about how we're going to physically do it, what it will look like, and the experience the audience will have. And that's how and the two of us met in the middle, and the people from in Incubus usually came from one or the other. In fact, they came from Sussex University or from Brighton Art College. There was nobody else really. And it was that meeting of the two. So when we created improvised shows, for example, there's one that we took up the Edinburgh Festival, which was, I had this mad idea that I wanted to do something about how a brain evolves, how it starts and how it learns and all the rest of it. And so we called it Brain, basically. And we actually spent about 20 weeks without a scenario, without anything like that, but just creating it, improvising it, putting it together. I think I might be very embarrassed by it now, but at the time, I was in my 20s. But in the end, the BBC thought highly enough of it to film it. It must be somewhere in the BBC archive. And they filmed it, and Anne Scott was the producer for it, I remember, and she's still around, dear Anne. And so this was how we did it. It was this meeting of the ideas and the art college side, the university and the art college. And I think that there was a tension between those two. So we had big quarrels, of course, but of course we did. But actually, it was the unifying of those two, I think, that made it strong.
Yes. God, that's amazing. So were you like, I don't know, Paul McCartney and John Lennon together?
I don't know. That's excessive.
But obviously there was a good energy between the two of you.
It was very good energy. We were very different. I think we sort of liked, admired and respected each other, and infuriated each other at different degrees, really, and also Paddy was he was really willing to try anything, absolutely anything, which was tremendous for me because I'd never, and I haven't since, frankly, worked with anybody who had that degree of daring. Yeah. Very rare, It's very rare to find people with that degree of daring and that fearlessness that Paddy had. And it was incredibly valuable. Yeah. He was fearless, and I think that was wonderful.
So after the Brain, were you still with the company that sort of trundled into the kind of the early 70s, or when did you decide?
I sort of left around about 71, 72, 71, I think. So I was with it about 3 years.
Yes.
Because afterwards, basically, after the Arts Council thing, when I applied to the Arts Council and got this job running this company called Theatre Nobel, I just went up to Burnley, and started up there. And you started applying various principles, and I learned all sorts of stuff in Burnley, which was, you have to understand that London was one thing, and then Burnley was something different. Burnley, they'd had no theatre for 30 years, and the last thing they had there was Donald Wolfett going round doing his King Lear, probably during the 50s, and that was it.
Yes.
So, and there was nothing. There were theatres, but they were empty. There were barns of places. So we just had to start creating theatre out of what was there, which we did. I mean, we learned. So what I'd learned from Incubus was very valuable.
Yes, and did it feel like a big decision to sort of say that you were going to step away from Incubus? Because I guess this is the point where Incubus continues on, and that's where they become a little bit better known in the sort of East Anglian fairs and festivals like Barsham and the Albion fairs. And I guess that's the bit where you've sort of separated, isn't it?
I think it was. I think it was when I separated, because I wanted to do this. Basically, like I said, I wanted to do it for money, and also I felt I felt we were going sort of round in circles a bit, and I felt that Paddy needed to basically have freedom to do what he wanted to do and do what he did well. And what he wanted to do wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. So it was quite amicable. I mean, I handed it all over to him. And they did really, really, really well. I mean, it was absolutely what he wanted to do. And I went to see the shows, and I loved them. I thought they were really good, but it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yes, absolutely. So Burnley, you'd spent how many years there? 5 years in the Burnley sort of theatre?
Yeah, and that was incredibly valuable. I mean, I also fell in love with the place. Because the other thing actually, David, was I just wanted to get out of London. I mean, I'd been born and bred in London suburbs, and London was not particularly pleasant at that time. It's not that pleasant now, but I mean, it wasn't particularly pleasant to be. And I just went up there, and I just loved the place.
Yes,
I loved it, and I loved, the whole area. I mean, it was Lancashire and Yorkshire. And actually, when I don't do it so much now because of COVID, but I mean, for a lot of the time when I was writing, I would actually go back up to Yorkshire, to the particular area of Yorkshire because we crossed the Lancashire-Yorkshire border. And I went up to go to Yorkshire, lovely little town called Burnsall. There's a wonderful hotel there called the Red Lion. I recommend it. It's marvellous. Yes. And I would actually go there for a couple of weeks, and to finish writing something. I really would. I just loved it. I thought it was lovely.
And how did you develop the theatre community in Burnley? Having like literally starting with a clean.
With difficulty, really. I mean, I was so naive. Oh my God, I was so naive. So the first thing we tried to do was we thought we'd do a modern play, and then we do a devised play. So the devised play was what was it? It was about Victorian explorers, because a couple of Victorian explorers had lived in Burnley, come from Burnley. So we took their journals and created a play out of that. It was sort of moderately all right, really. Yes. And the other one was a play, a sort of popular play, modern play, The Knack, by Angelico. And what was so interesting was that all the audiences were completely shocked by it. They were totally, totally shocked.
Yes.
Because, people talking about sex and rape and things like that. It was really, really not on. So we had to rethink. So that's why I said we learned the hard way. So the next time we did it, I thought we need to take theatre absolutely back to its basic roots. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to assume that anyone knows anything about theatre. We're going to look at what actually would be the way to get to people. It's primary emotions, it's sort of simple stories. So what we did is we took a Marlowe play, not Dr. Faustus, mm-hmm. But The Jew of Malta. which I've always loved. I thought it was a brilliant play, The Jew of Malta, with this sort of character, Barabbas, who basically you love to hate. And we did it. I did a version of it which could be done by 5 actors, and we got a whole new company for the second season. We've got a whole new company because I felt the first company they were sort of almost like the usual suspects for regional theatre, and I decided I didn't want to do this. So I went to scour some of the drama schools, and I found the people I wanted to work with who were more like the Incubus crowd, really, and I found them. And we created theatre out of this basic idea of primary emotions, sort of very, very, very straightforward, almost like simple storylines, which were quite extreme, and it worked. I mean, they loved it. They just loved the people who thought the knack was really appalling were not at all bothered by a character who dies in a pot of boiling oil. I mean, they didn't bother them at all. They loved it. It was wonderful. So it was almost like, we did it more or less like a pantomime, but actually, it had a kind of raw power to it, I think. That was a good one. And I think it worked really, really well. And we did other ones. The other one we did is we went really quite a long way with that, towards the extent that I thought, we did one that I think actually worked really well, but it wasn't even a play at all. It was an adaptation of The War of the Worlds, not like Orson Welles did it.
Yes.
What we did is we used the story. It was basically a guided tour, and what it was a whole series of shaggy dog stories because Burnley was a wreck. Basically, it was a complete wreck. And so what we did is we created a narrative which explained why Burnley was like it was. Almost like an alternative reality, because of this Martian invasion that had happened a couple of generations ago and had been wiped from people's memories. So the play consisted of a guided tour of Burnley, which everybody knew, but with these shaggy dog stories about what happened when the Martians landed.
Blimey, that's extraordinary.
I know, it worked rather well. It worked really well.
Yes.
And we did...
I was going to say, because I know quite a few, I don't know, this might be a few years later, but I know quite a few members of various punk bands, the narco punk bands who went into Leeds came from Burnley. So I wondered if they were starting to watch some of this theatre.
I don't know. They may have done. I mean, we went to Burnley. We performed in Burnley, but all around the area. And we performed in Blackburn as well. We were invited there. Jew of Malta went to Blackburn. And we did something which was much more based on local mythology, which is the Witches of Pendle. And so we did, because the Pendle Witches is a sort of big local mythology. So and what I did then is I really wanted to involve local writers, because I thought it was, I shouldn't be writing this. They should be writing it. This is their story. Yes. So by that point, I wanted to bring in, I had a team of writers, all from the local area. I mean, we had an awful lot of editing on their work because they loved writing these long monologues, which decided was not particularly dramatic, so I had to sort of dramatize it. But basically, we got them to do the work. And I thought it was important that their story was told by them, So this was sort of 70s, sort of mid-70s, yeah.
It's a very experimental time, because a few months ago I did an interview with Neil Oram, who went and lived on the sort of, I don't know, somewhere near Inverness, but he did a play, I think it was a 9-hour play called The Warp. So during the 70s, there were these kind of quite experimental bits and pieces happening, and for some people, they really did push the boundaries. I mean, were you feeling quite ambitious at this stage? Because there's nothing like youthful enthusiasm and naivety and kind of ambition to sort of think, oh yes, I know, we'll put a 9-hour play on, it will be fine.
I don't think I would do a 9-hour play, no. I really wouldn't. I don't think I'd do a 9-hour play. I don't see the point of doing a 9-hour play. I was more interested. That's when I said I learned about audiences. We needed audiences to come in. So we needed to create plays and shows that would attract an audience, either because it would tweak their interest or because it was something that was in their lives, like the witch's story they all had. And I think it wasn't, I wasn't that interested in just being experimental for the sake of being experimental. It's the subject matter that interested me, you know. Excuse me.
Yes.
It was the subject matter that interested me. It was the audience that interested me. It wasn't being experimental for the sake of it.
Yeah, and it must have been a fantastic way to get to know the community in the whole area.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have formed a lot of relationships and a sense of community during this period. So you must have had a lot of growth, with yourself and your work and responsibility.
Yeah. Well, it's responsibility. I mean, also, I think I probably didn't realise how difficult it would be to run a theatre company, properly run a theatre company with having to do budgets, having to do reports to committees, and having to manage, the chairman, for example, of the Theatre Mobile was the editor of the local newspaper. So having to deal with all of that, it's easy to get sort of romantic about it, but there was a lot of stuff where we had to deal with people objecting to what we were doing, and having to go and argue for it, and having to argue for money, and having to argue with the Arts Council, and having to argue with Equity. So there was the business side of it, which of course I knew nothing about. I learned it on the job.
I know.
I had to know.
Yes, this is true. Yeah. Well, one thing you mentioned right at the beginning, which did make me slightly smile, was when you were talking about working with different people and sort of who gets paid and not paid. And I realised that, with certain experiences in my life, but also talking to various bands, it's having that conversation at the beginning of like actually putting it on, clearly, like whose names are kind of signed on these documents, who's actually really responsible, who isn't so responsible, and where does the the buck stop. So I think no one really has those conversations at the beginning because it feels a bit unnecessary and it feels like it will somehow spoil it and you want it to keep rolling, but then you realize you've got to then sort of go back and say, well, actually, I know from what you mentioned of Incubus, possibly it sounded a bit like, needing to have that conversation at times with people.
I think we should have done. Yeah, but we didn't know. I mean, listen, we knew nothing. We knew nothing about theatre. We knew nothing about running a theatre. It was only when I began to realise that people were being discontented and I could see why, I understood why they were, and I talked to them, that I realised. I know maybe even they didn't realise until they got to say it, How do I know what I think?
There's so many stories of people who'd had that kind of vaguely verbal kind of conversation, like, oh yeah, when there's some money, we'll make sure we all sort of share it out, and then when there is a bit and no one really knows and it doesn't quite happen as promised, and then everyone goes to court and it gets very messy. So then after Burnley, what happens? What happens post Burnley?
I sort of went into doldrums after that because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So a lot of the time, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what I did. I did the odd few shows, and then I fell into. I tell you what it was. Also, I realised at that point that I thought I knew quite a lot about plays, probably less than I'd realised, but actually I knew nothing about acting. Nothing. How would I? I mean, I'd never had any training. So I decided to actually go and I attended sort of theatre workshops. And I ended up teaching. And I worked at a drama school called Drama Studio, which it wasn't one of the better drama schools, I have to say, But what it was, but I loved it, because what it was I could do productions and I worked with the students, but actually it became like a laboratory. And I learned I learned from the people I was working with the students. So when you have to, for example, you have to explain to a student who really has no sense of timing, you explain how to time a joke, this is what you do, and it's to do with the breath. You have to have a breath before the punchline, all the rest of it. I hadn't realised that until I had to explain it, and then watching, for example, sitting in on some of the classes that this man Patrick Tucker did on Shakespeare, and learning, for example, that Shakespeare's company never rehearsed. They might have run it through, but they never rehearsed. And that was because Shakespeare, first of all, knew everybody he was writing for, but also that everything you need to know that's about how to act Shakespeare is in that text.
Right.
It's in, 5 stress lines. So where there's 4 stress, he wants a pause. It's simple as that. Everything, all the clues are in there. You just have to know what to look for. And those actors would have picked them up. And we, of course, have to learn how to do it. So I set about learning. And I learned about Shakespeare. I learned about that, that whole area of how to get a performance out of someone, which I hadn't learned before. And the thing that triggered it for me was when I did a project for the Open Space Theatre, Charles Marowitz's Open Space Theatre, which was great. I worked there quite a lot. I directed for them, and in that 70s period. And I remember I was doing one thing. I was directing something, and an actor turned to me and he said, "John, I can't act an idea." And I thought, he's right. I'm just giving them ideas. I'm not helping them at all. So, which was really interesting. Crisis, bottom dropped out of your life, So I decided, no, I'm going to have to find out. I really have to find out. Well, by then I was married and I had children, so I couldn't go to school. So I thought, well, I'll just attend some evening classes, and then I ended up, like I said, teaching it. And I was teaching it, and it was very interesting teaching it because by teaching, I began to learn what actors need. And that became really useful when I started directing opera, because most opera singers don't know how to act.
No.
They can't act. Because the acting isn't a priority. The voice is a priority. So understanding all of that was really valuable. So it was a sort of learning period, really.
Yeah.
70s. And I think that just learning what an actor needs, what goes into creating a performance, how an actor works or needs to work, what a director needs to give an actor, what they don't need to give an actor. So when I, for example, watched, I got a job as an assistant director at the Coliseum at English National Opera, and I watched the director, who shall be nameless, go up on stage, but someone was pointing to someone on stage, and he suddenly flew into a tantrum and said, no, not like that. And he lifted the finger 3 inches. He said, there, you have to point there. I thought, that's not how to direct. I don't care where they're pointing. It's why they're doing it that matters. Why are they doing it? What are they doing? So I learned a lot about what not to do as well as what to do. And that's, in a way, that's what began my career, sort of directing. It sort of boosted my ability as a director, I think, and then took me into opera, which I loved. I just loved it.
That's amazing. So during that period then, sort of 79, Margaret Thatcher gets into power. There's the whole political world going on with, people, things like the Falkland Greenham Common, the miners' strike. So was your 80s very much in that period of was that when opera becomes part of your life and directing?
It started to. A lot of it was theatre. Like I did quite a lot of C.P. Taylor plays, which I liked a lot. Operation Elvis, for example, I remember. And then I did a production of Sylvia Plath's Three Women. And that really came out of all the improvisation work I taught, because what we did is I did a lot of work with, based on the principles of theatre created by this woman called Viola Spolin, who's a marvellous acting teacher. And I think a lot of her stuff is absolute genius. And the book called Improvisation for the Theatre. And I began to teach improvisation, which became a language.
Yeah.
And one of the things she does she talks about actors doing productions without props, without set, but just with what she calls space objects, which is they actually create it. And so it's not mime, it's creating it by, for example, if you're holding a baby, the head of a baby is heavier than the rest of the body. So you need to actually have the weight there. So when we did Three Women, which is about three women having babies, and it was in a very good cast. Susan Penn Halligan was in it, I seem to remember. Can't remember the other two. That we used, there was no babies on stage. They were all entirely space objects, babies. And so when there was one wonderful moment I remember, and Susan actually, she was going around looking at all the babies in the ward, and she was looking at them, peering in, and I saw the audience peering over, looking as well, because she'd managed to create it. She picked up a baby, and the audience was looking at the baby. There was no baby there.
Amazing.
And it was purely that, and it was to do with the actor's intention creates the baby. That was really interesting, you know.
Yes.
So that sort of work I did, really. And enjoyed very much. You know.
And then I was going to say, you know, so that was that period. And then 90s, what did the 90s shape up for you?
Oh, a lot of that was opera. I was doing opera, a lot of it. And I was doing, this is when I discovered, I think the big change for me with that was when I discovered these operas written in Terezin, in the Theresienstadt concentration camp. They were written there and performed there. And that's what I did, is I translated one of them, which was an opera written entirely for children, which is actually, my translation is going to be used as a production in Bristol in June. They're going to be using it. I've been talking to them about it. Right. They wanted some changes in the translation, which is fine by me, you know. And then another one, which is a most extraordinary opera, probably, I think it's a masterpiece myself, which almost prefigured Beckett. I mean, this was written in 1944 in a concentration camp, which is a kind of limbo world. It's called The Emperor of Atlantis. In fact, did you come to that talk I mentioned?
No, unfortunately, I was just busy at that time.
No, it was about that. It was about this particular extraordinary opera. It was about an opera. It was an opera. Okay, I need to explain what Terezin was. Terezin was a holding camp for Auschwitz, and what was important about it was it wasn't a death camp, but a train ran through Terezin. It's a town outside Prague. I've been there, an hour outside Prague, and you know the town was on the way to Auschwitz because of a railway line. So all the people who arrived there, about 600,000 people were in there at any one time. And they could at any moment be taken away on this train, you know. And so this group of composers ended up there, 4 great composers, but a lot of other ones as well. And I've done a lot of their work. And they created work which was really about the situation, and The Emperor of Atlantis is that one. And it's an extraordinary opera because it's about, it's called The Emperor of Atlantis or Death Abdicates. And what happens is the Emperor of Atlantis is this mad dictator. And he sort of stands for almost every crazed tyrant you can imagine, including people like Trump. He has a lot of Trump-like qualities to him. And so he declares war. He's been fighting a war for centuries and generations. And he decides the final war was going to be where everybody has to kill everybody else. At that point, death has had enough. Death's a character in the opera. And he goes on strike. And so at that point, no one can die. So the emperor is completely impotent, you know. Yes. And it's the most extraordinary idea. So what happens is, in the third scene, which is gorgeous, what happens is two soldiers, one from one side, one from the other, boy and a girl, realize there's no point in fighting, so they fall in love. And it becomes this wonderful lyrical scene. Of course, it's all a parable, you know. And Death comes back at the end and says, yes, I will come back to the emperor, but you have to be the first to die. And it's almost like nature rebelling against this tyranny. So it's an extraordinary work, and the music is simply brilliant. And we did it. We did the first staging of that at the Donmar Warehouse in 1988, and then revived it several times in South Bank, 1993, and then part of that was filmed for the BBC. And another opera, the children's opera, that was filmed in its entirety by the BBC, and I translated that one. So those works, I think were probably some things I'm most proud of.
Well, absolutely.
Because I think they were really. I mean, what I wanted to do is I wanted to restore them so they would be in the operatic repertoire. With The Emperor of Atlantis, we had to virtually reconstruct it because it was in fragments, in bits and pieces everywhere. So we managed to pull together the whole score, and that was it really. We managed to do it. It's just been done at the Barbican in January. It was just done there. So it's we succeeded. We brought it back into into the standard repertoire now.
So just to try and get a head around this place, which sounds like kind of hell. I mean, so was it there? Were the people who were being held there? Were they like, oh, we're not quite sure. We don't, you're too talented to go further on and be kind of exterminated. So is it a case that they had to be in limbo, but kind of...
They were in limbo, yes. And their talent had nothing to do with it, because one day in 1944, after The Emperor of Atlantis was performed in dress rehearsal, then the SS saw it and banned it, because they realised that the central character, Emperor Überall, was, guess who? Hitler.
Yes.
And it was a satire on Hitler, but it was a lot more than that. It was actually what he was doing, what Victor Ullmann, the composer, was doing. He was predicting that Nazism contained the seeds of its own destruction. Basically, that's what it was. It was that extreme. It's an incredibly brave piece of work. I mean, real bravery,
Yes.
So no, I mean, the whole thing was created totally by chance. This is the terrible thing about a lot of the Holocaust stories. Whether people survived or didn't was almost down to chance. Yes. So one of the survivors I met a lot of them, a wonderful pianist called Edith Krauss, she only died in 2013, aged 102. Bless her, Edith was wonderful. Edith told me that she was told that she would be on the next transport to Auschwitz, and so she had to get ready. She was very young at the time. So she went to her room and she waited and she waited and she waited, and no one came. No one came to collect her. And they forgot. They just forgot.
Right.
And that's why she survived, Whereas others, like the composers, all those four great composers, they all died on the same day in Auschwitz.
Blimey,
they would have been the same generation as people like Benjamin Britten, and they would have been as good as Benjamin Britten as well. I mean, there was even younger ones like Gideon Klein, who was 21 at the time, and he would have gone on to be, a really major composer, major composer, and he was lost completely. I mean, they all died.
Yes.
Only a few, and ironically, the only person who, out of the cast of The Emperor of Atlantis, survived was a marvellous old man who I met called Karel Beerman, who sang Death. And he survived. He was another one who just never sent to Auschwitz.
And how did the work survive itself? And they didn't just go, right, we're going
to... The Emperor of Atlantis, well, what happened was that Ullmann wrote out the whole opera, but that bit was lost. But what was there was that, when a composer writes the music, when he had to write the music, he also had to write out everybody's singing part, or he dictated it to them and they copied it, and the orchestration. So we had lots of all the roles. We had the individual scores of those. We had some of the orchestration, most of the orchestrated bits, so all the orchestral parts were there. But there were long streams of dialogue that were missing. And we did find them. And this was extraordinary dialogue because it was all from a radio. I mean, one of the characters in it is a radio. You know, we talk about this experimental theatre from the 70s. What they were doing in Terrett Scene was utterly extraordinary. I mean, radios talking and you know, and a character called Loudspeaker, you know, because they got their orders from loudspeakers.
Yes.
So it begins with this character singing "Hello, hello." He's called Loudspeaker, and he becomes like the MC for the whole opera.
Yes.
He says, I'm going to give you the characters. So they learned their stuff from Brecht, no doubt about it. But and there's a lot of, you know, you can hear Kurt Weill in there somewhere, but it's way, way more extraordinary than that.
Wow.
You know, so I think that was very exciting to do and to discover.
Well, I mean, it must feel also like a huge responsibility to document and archive and perform this work, because you know, because when you think about the artist, sometimes I'm listening to music or reading something from decades ago, and you often wonder where they would do what they were doing when what they were looking out, you know, the window, or what the seasons were. Was it spring, summer, winter? You know, and then you're thinking, well, you know, their kind of view was slightly different. Plus, you know, there must have been death and hell.
Well, interesting, yes, it was. But Ullmann, I found Ullmann really interesting. Victor Ullmann, he was sort of a follower of Rudolf Steiner, and this is where Atlantis comes into it, because Steiner believed that history moved in cycles and that each civilization would rise and fall. And the model for it was Atlantis. This was the myth of Atlantis. He didn't believe it really existed. It was a myth that he followed. So, which is why it's called Der Kaiser von Atlantis, the Emperor of Atlantis. But Ullmann had, I think, a faith and a belief, not Jewish, he was Jewish, but he wasn't sort of, you know, a strict believing Jew any more than I am. But actually what he had was a sort of very strong philosophical basis to what he wanted to do. And that's why he felt that he really sincerely believed that whether he lived or not, Nazism did contain the seeds of its own destruction. And so he had this view, which he really wanted to put across. And he did say, for the quotes from him, he said that the urge in Terrett Scene, the urge to create, is commensurate with the will to live. So I think, he said, by no means do we sit down and weep by the waters of Babylon. He said, that's not what we did. What we were doing was they were working. And the other one was extraordinary, was a man called František Zelenka, who was a designer. And the children's opera that I translated, and that I'm going to send you a little link, which is a project that we've created with our current production company called After Eden. This opera is really written for children to perform. All the characters are children, are played by children. And I discovered it quite by accident. I discovered it. I've got the CDs right here that I found in a Prague record store in 1992, and I've got them. I put this on and I fell in love. Absolutely fell in love with the music. I thought, I have to do this. Absolutely got to do it. It's simply marvelous music. But so every child there are lots of children in Terrett Scene performed this. And there were 55 performances of this opera in Terrett Scene. So the Zelenka discovered that he was František Zelenka was a very famous designer. He designed houses in Prague. They're still there, you know. He designed stage, he designed film and everything. And he was Jewish. He sent to Terrett Scene along with all the others. And he decided that every time a child stepped off the transport to arrive at Terrett Scene, they were given a costume and a character. and that they could play that costume and character off stage and on stage. And it was a way of using this music as psychological survival for them.
Wow.
And it's just an extraordinary idea, you know.
My God, it is.
And it really, really was something. I mean, I think their bravery and their courage in the face of such terrible tyranny was utterly remarkable.
Yes,
you know, it really was. That's what I found. You know, so that's what I was doing in the 90s. You know, along with a lot of other stuff as well. You know,
yes.
We did a lot of Eastern European work as well,
which is extraordinary. Yes, but then you set up Craft of Communication in the last 20 years.
That really was because I have children and I need to earn money. And what I decided to do was, I'd been looking to run a theatre, okay, and then a friend of mine who was running a theatre, it wasn't even a very big one, called it somewhere in Basingstoke, had a heart attack. And he lived, but I mean, he had a heart attack out of just the sheer stress of running it. And I thought, I'm not going to do this. I am not going to die because of a theatre in Basingstoke, all right? I'm not going to do that. So I decided that I would sort of, at that point, I was much more interested in writing, and I wanted sort of that time to do that. But also, I to keep my family, you know, money again. And so what I decided to do was, I'd found that there was a need, really, a hole in the market, which was for training people how to give presentations. And so basically all the skills I taught to actors and singers in drama school, I then started teaching to business people, you know, and we're still running. I mean, that was in 2000, and 22 years later, we're still here. In fact, we have just got this huge contract with Tara, my wife now runs it, with the Environment Agency. We do an awful lot of work with the Environment Agency and with L'Oreal and, you know, a lot of other, you know, sort of quite a few commercial companies, you know, lawyers and things like that. But the interesting thing was, it was all those skills I'd gone out of my way to learn about acting that really helped. I just extended it. In fact, the most valuable sort of, it's called transferable skills. The most transferable skill was when I started teaching acting to opera singers, because opera singers have a different relationship with their body than actors do. As far as an opera singer is concerned, their body is the sort of case for the voice, basically. So they don't chuck it around, okay? They don't, you know, it's like a violin. So the voice is the violin, and they are the case for the violin. And it was actually, so I had to find ways of teaching acting to people who had that very different relationship with their body, often a rather inhibited relationship with their body. And, you know, you have to find a way to do that. And that technique for teaching opera singers was what we then adapted for business people, because they also, you know, I mean, I always joke, you know, most business people see their body as the thing that takes their head from one meeting to the next. You know, that's what their body is, right? So it's not something expressive. So we used this technique and some of the skills that I'd learned and things I picked up in teaching people how to first of all get the attention of an audience and then keep it and then influence them.
Well, it's funny you it's funny because I suppose, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, I went to a few of those weekend workshops of, you know, how to improve your life or get more skills. And I went to a Tony Robbins one, you know, and one of those, and he talked about the body a lot. And he sort of just said about sort of keeping the back straight, but sort of bringing your chest up by, you know, I don't know, 5 millimeters. But he said the difference between walking into a room like this and walking into a room like this. It's kind of
it's enormous. Yes, absolutely. That's another way of describing something called status, which is status. It's an acting technique which I learned way back in the 70s, and it comes from a wonderful man called Keith Johnston. I used to go to his workshops. And what it was the idea is the more space you take up and the more time you take, the higher your status, right? Like this. Whereas
Yeah.
the less space you have and the less time you take, the lower your status. You know. And that's the difference. And so we teach them a lot. It starts with teaching them about status, but that has an enormous impact on people. You know.
Yes, I would imagine you must change people's lives, and also,
Yes, we do. Yeah.
I know, because it's kind of just technique, isn't it, and practice and repetition. And also, I think the other thing is to be really prepared, for those kind of moments.
Well,
And not,
yes.
that's that's the critical moment.
It is critical. It's astounding with a lot of business people. They will actually receive their presentation from their team, and they'll just walk out and do it. And I say to them, "There's no actor in the world that would actually go on without rehearsing. What makes you think you can actually do this? So we're going to rehearse, and this is how you rehearse. So you teach them how to rehearse. So it's transferable." And the great thing about it is you can add several noughts onto the end of what you've learned in a drama school for doing it.
Absolutely.
But also it gave me time, to start to write. It gave me time to start After Eden and to do these other projects that we're doing.
Yes.
So it's been, and it's almost become like a family business now, which is good. So that's, we've used all that.
And it must be nice to meet a whole nother community and a whole nother world that you...
Oh, my goodness. I mean, the things I learned doing this, how else could I would never, if I'd stuck doing theatre and opera, I would never have got to work at the Ministry of Defence, with the police, with a whole load of teachers, and I'd never have discovered all the stuff I have about the environment, because we work with the Environment Agency, and we discovered so much stuff, terrifying stuff, about what's happening to the environment.
Yes.
Absolutely. Really interesting,
Absolutely. And it must be, yes.
It's some really interesting people,
Yes, absolutely. And did you, just briefly on the Incubus, as one of the starting points, did you keep in touch with Paddy at all during those decades?
Yes. We did. When I ran the theatre in Edinburgh called the Pool Theatre, long gone now, but we had a festival, and I got Incubus up to perform. They performed at. We were running two venues, and they were performing at one of them, at Edinburgh Festival. Yeah. I got them up there to perform. And they were doing some really good stuff then. Really good. This was early. Let me see. When was that? Might have been 74, 75, something like that.
Amazing.
We did that. Yes. Yeah. We sort of lost touch after that. We lost touch after that.
It does happen, doesn't it? But yes, if you could have said something to you like a 16, 18-year-old self starting out, is there any kind of words of wisdom that you would have thought, could have
16, 17-year-old self?
Probably wouldn't have listened, but if you could have just said, look, just take this, and it may be useful.
It was said to me, actually. It was said to me by by an actress who's sort of, who, she used to do things like interesting stuff like grounding, which I needed when I was sort of, lost. Having got divorced, I was feeling lost. And she actually said, and I think I would say this to myself, you will never be able to commit yourself to a project if it doesn't have some moral value. If it isn't going to help people live their lives. And I think that's the point of it. Right. I've never ever been interested in escapist entertainment, and that's why I wasn't interested in experimenting for its own sake. It was actually, what's the story? What's it about? What's it? How is the audience going to? What will the audience take away from this? How can it matter to them? And when I was at the Colosseum, working at the Colosseum, and we were talking about repertoire. I would always ask, I was quite junior there, but I kept saying, why are we doing this opera now? Why now? Why this one now? I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm saying why. Why are we doing this one? Because I remember it in a way, it's really interesting thinking about, for example, Shakespeare plays that suddenly become relevant. Shakespeare's always relevant, but some more than others. So I remember when I was at school, a play like Measure for Measure was always thought of as they were called problem comedies and this is because they didn't fit into were they a comedy, were they a tragedy? Nobody could quite work out. Well, that's the point, actually. And then Measure for Measure, which is, about Isabella, who is, she basically, she wants to be a nun, but but her brother is arrested, and the judge says, "Okay, I will free him if you have sex with me." There's a huge moral dilemma. Yes. And suddenly, in the 70s and 80s, it became the most important Shakespeare play because it was heightened and really brought into focus the position of women in a male world. And up to that point, it had been thought of, this is a really difficult play. No one knows what to do with this play. Suddenly it makes sense. And I think it's like that. It's that it's got to say, why are we doing this play now? Why am I telling this story now? It's got to be because it matters in a world that is increasingly fucked up, And that's why I carry on writing. That's why I carry on doing the work, because I just think I'm not going to retire because there's too much wrong with the world. Not because I'm ambitious, but because there's too much wrong with the world. So I think this, the world that my children will inherit is completely fucked up. So what are we going to do about it?
Yes. Did you with the opera? Because I used to, with the radio, go to the Theatre Royal a lot to see, I think it was the English Opera Company.
Yeah.
But they used to always do the same 3 operas that I have to say, and I can't remember what they were, but the ones.
All the time, all with La Bohème, yes, I know. Yeah, well, that's the reason I started my own opera company. That's why we started this company called Mecklenburg Opera, which is the one that did the Terentzine operas, because I wanted to get away from that. Yeah, yes. Yeah. Most of the time. I mean, I actually hate La Bohème, and I had to do the Barber of Seville. I hated the Barber of Seville. It's pretty, but it's pointless, I think the way opera houses are run is more to do, well, it depends on which one you're talking about, but something like Covent Garden, it's more to do with the stars that they can attract, because they have to get the stars in, get the people in the audience.
Yes.
So, and the repertoire, and singers are not like actors. Singers, the sort of major singers, they will have a repertoire of a whole series of roles, and they will go in and they will do their Figaro, they will do their Rigoletto, and very often not be affected by the production they're in, unless the director's particularly strong. And it's a world that is really dominated by the stars that are in it. And also opera companies play safe because opera is very expensive to do. There's a lot of people on stage and in the pit, so they have to have an audience, so they have to be sure they'll get an audience. So doing an experimental work or work that's not known or something like that, something that's new, is a big risk for them. So yeah, that's probably the reason they do that. That's the reason why. It's the economics of it,
It just seemed a shame because it got to the point where you think, actually, I've seen that.
Of course, I wouldn't want to go. I've seen so many bad productions of La Bohème, and a lot of people. I think it's very nice opera, but I never want to do it. Ever.
No, absolutely.
I really wouldn't. I don't like Puccini particularly at all. Anyway, how are we doing?
Yes, well, yeah, it is. But this has been fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much. This has been amazing.
No, I mean, if you want to find out any more, 5 minutes more, I don't mind, If you've got any other questions,
Well, I suppose, just because of having the career that you have you ever sort of thought, God, this has been a really hard gig. I could have just done something a bit easier, because there must have been some real highs, but it's often dealing with the moments where things start to get kind of difficult and personal relationships. And I know from, with creative endeavors, sometimes things, there's some of the great regrets are those kind of people that you started out so having such great friendship, and then it gets a bit busy and you never see each other again. I just wondered how you've coped with those kind of moments, or whether you've managed to avoid some of them.
I think generally I've avoided them. I think the things I do regret is when I didn't. I think when I allowed that part of my mother's fear, I'll be honest with you. I mean, if you're born into a family where the main emotion is fear and you're hiding, a lot of the time, they're hiding a lot of the time, it's really easy to back away from things. So I feel where I've sort of backed away from challenges, that I do regret. Or I backed away, or I couldn't see my way, I think that I do sort of regret. It's not so much, great creative partnerships that broke up, because I wouldn't say that ever particularly was a problem. I mean, Paddy and I sort of drifted apart. We had our disagreements, but we drifted apart because I think it was a period when we would get together, when we were right together, and a period when actually we were going to go off in different directions, but it wasn't acrimonious at all. So no, it wasn't about that. It was more to do with not really, I think at times when I really didn't either rise to the challenge of something, or where I didn't really understand what it was that I needed to do at any one moment. And I think as I've got older, that's less true. That's less true.
Yes.
So, now I think I really, really want to do, the next drama I want to write is going to have to be about climate change, because I think it's going to something that affects absolutely everybody. And I think it's really important to do something about that, because it's not something, it's so easy. Look at what this government's doing. I mean, they're going to basically ride roughshod over everything they did with COP26. And I know they are, because we were involved with Craft Communication in a lot of the presentations, rehearsing them, a lot of presentations made at COP26. I mean, we work with the people. So I know what they're doing. I went through all the material from them. I know it, and I know when it's being ratted on.
Yes.
So I think that's, I think I learned you just have to, you have to stay present, and stay present and not be. It'd be easy, certainly at my age. I'm 74. Being, it's tempting to think, I think about being in the 90s. It was so much nicer then. It was much nicer in the 90s, frankly. I much prefer it. But actually, that's pointless. You're dealing with what you're dealing with now.
Yes, well, absolutely.
The world now, and the world now, my kids are going to, are living in, and it's not very nice at all.
But it is quite weird because on when you talked about your mother and her mother and family, you look on that side, you think, wow, I wouldn't swap for that. And then you look at your kids and you think, no, actually, you've been kind of blessed in a way, haven't you? But then perhaps...
yes, I do feel blessed. I do feel blessed, especially with my children. I do feel that. And I think very lucky as well. I feel I've been very lucky.
Yes.
I'm lucky that I'm 74 and very healthy. I'm very lucky. And I'm very lucky that, I'm very lucky that I've had the career that I've had and been able to have the career that I've had. And that I'm carrying on having the career.
Yes. So if anybody wants to find out more about some of these productions, is there do you have a website or Facebook page or some social media site that one can go to?
I don't do social media. I don't do it. I really don't do. I'm sorry. I just don't do social media.
No. So where does one find about some of this information?
I don't really know. I don't know. I mean, I've got my CV, but which you can have. Or I might have sent it to you. I can't remember. I don't know. I think probably Unfinished Histories has got stuff.
Oh, yes, I've got
That's
unfinished
quite
business.
useful. But I've never really been that interested in kind of looking back. You know what I mean? I'm not
Yes.
that interested in that. It's more, it is interesting. As I've been talking to you, I've been feeling more regret at things I didn't do than I have pleasure at things I did do. It's interesting. I feel more regret about that. Because there are things I could have done that I didn't do, but there's no point talking about that. But I think I don't know where you can find it. I'm afraid, David.
No. But I will Google away at some of these names.
Google it, and see what happens. I mean, Theatre Mobile would be an interesting one to look at, if it's still around. I don't know if it might have been wound up. It was, but it was fun. I mean, we had a good time doing that. It was really good.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to John Abulafia for giving me the time to talk about his life in the creative industries, arts, theatre, and especially Incubus. This has been the C86 show. David Eastaugh. Have a great week. Stay safe.